So I'm really excited to hear from Anne today. We're going to talk about data to dashboard with Excel, and just some background. Anne and I have worked together in the past. We've done some trainings together in the past for financial services company, and Anne is actually the course author for the data to dashboard course in the DATAcated, started in the DATAcated Academy and now lives in the DATAcated circle. So you actually have full access to her data to dashboard course. And today we're going to do a 30-minute session where she's going to share some dashboarding tips in Excel. I'll give you a bit of a background on Anne. She is an internationally acclaimed speaker. She equips organizations to get their data out of their dusty spreadsheets and into real-world conversations. As you can imagine, that is extremely important because a lot of companies are keeping their data in their dusty spreadsheets. She delivers keynotes all over the world, workshops, webinars, and again, with the aim of equipping organizations to visualize data more effectively. Got more people. I should just disable this waiting room. People just are waiting there. Sorry for that. She's been invited to speak in 30 states, 10 countries, and over 4,800 people have enrolled in her online training academy. This is as we last spoke. I'm sure that number has gone up even higher at this point. And you can jump in and let me know how many people have enrolled in your courses to date. 6,000. I'm going to assume that's 6,000. I love it. She's consulted over 200 organizations, including the United Nations Center for Disease Control, Harvard University, and now she's here talking to us in the DATAcated circle. Really an honor to have you here. And she's also traveled quite a bit. She now lives in Florida with her husband and 3 children. And welcome to the DATAcated circle. The spotlight is all on you. I just want to let people know what to expect. We're going to give you the stage for about 30 minutes. You're going to educate us, drop some knowledge our way, and then we're going to have time for a Q&A. So as you're listening and you have a question pop up, feel free to put that in the chat and we'll take those towards the end. Unless it's something urgent and you want to put that in the chat, we'll take that as it comes as well. And then we'll also have some time for networking towards the end, where we'll go into little breakout rooms. We have a topic for discussion. Today, we're going to talk about how we all got started in data. So I think it's an interesting icebreaker for us to get to know each other. On that note, Anne, feel free to take it away.
Well, welcome everybody. I've got some materials we're going to go through. I've got some getting to know you types of questions. So let's dive in. Okay. So hopefully you can see my Excel spreadsheet. Yeah,
yep.
Sounds good. Okay, great. Great. So like Kate said, I'm Anne. I run a training and consulting company called Depict Data Studio. The best way to keep in touch with me is over LinkedIn. I've learned from Kate, and I really like LinkedIn these days. I really do. It's really grown on me. So I'm going to pop my profile in the chat in case you want to connect there. You don't have to write me a message or anything unless you want to. I connect with everybody, so don't feel awkward like pressing that connect button so we can stay in touch. Okay, so my goal today is I want to move you all up half a step within 60 minutes, but really within 30 minutes, because we're going to do Q&A, we're going to do some networking in the breakout rooms. So if you're a beginner, I want to move you up to like a little bit more, a half a step towards intermediate. If you're intermediate with Excel, I want to move you up a little bit more. So let me know in the chat, where do you feel like you're at with your Excel spreadsheet skills? Ooh. Are you on the beginner end? We're intermediate, we're advanced. Which of these phrases resonate most? And I will say too, I think assessing your own Excel skills or any data skills, I think it's impossible. I work with a lot of companies for a living, and sometimes they're like, we need the advanced training. And I go in and it's really, they need the beginner training, but you can't really tell them that. That's like very tricky. Or sometimes the advanced people don't realize how advanced they are. So I think it's very hard to assess ourselves. That's why I added some phrases in here to help us figure out where we're at. Okay, let's see where you're at. So Kate says intermediate, Steve intermediate, Christine intermediate, Dolly maybe in between intermediate and advanced, Vedant intermediate, Craig advanced based on row 25. Which one is that? Oh, you could probably teach somebody else. Cool. Christy's between intermediate and advanced, Magdi, intermediate, Dolly can teach someone how to use stuff, but I know there's useful stuff I don't always know. Yeah, me too, Dolly, me too. So I've been using Excel since a million years ago, since elementary school, when my nerdy PhD economist dad was like, hey, Anne, come into the home office. I want to teach you these spreadsheet formulas. And I was like, I just want to go kick a soccer ball in the backyard or like go to gymnastics class. And he was like, trust me, this seems boring, but it's going to be so useful someday. I was like, okay, dad, whatever. And then, he taught me like Control C is copy and Control V is paste, like those basic things I did as a kid. That tells you I was doomed to have this career. And then I think at some point, maybe the year after college, I learned like this much Excel stuff right away in my first big like government contracting job. And I felt so advanced. And then as I learned more about Excel, I started to feel really beginner. So it's very tricky. But anyway, no matter your starting point, let's move you up about a half a step. And this is what I want to teach you about today is how to make interactive dashboards in Excel. So we're going to need these 4 pieces all set up, and then we're going to link them all. So let me know too in the chat, how comfortable are you with this first piece of cleaning data? Is that something you're like, oh, cleaning data? I know exactly what you mean. I know 10 different things that I do when I clean data. Or are you like, I don't know, what is she talking about, cleaning data? That's things like checking for duplicates, checking for missing data, recoding data, like turning birth date into age, all those types of things. Some comfortable people, not excited for it. Yeah. Nodding in agreement there. It takes forever. I'd say it's the least sexy part of this whole process. What about pivot tables? Let me know if you use pivot tables already. Have you heard of them? Have you not? Have you used them once or twice? Do you use them all the time? Could you teach somebody how to use them in your sleep? How about your pivot table skills? Craig says fairly strong. Great. Dolly, you do it regularly, the least fun. Maybe you mean about data cleaning. Pivot tables and charts all the time. Great. And then what about pivot charts? There's regular charts, but then there's pivot charts, and they're similar but different. They're similar but different. Craig says not so much. Not used. I'm a data viz trainer and designer for a living. So I have a love-hate relationship with pivot charts. As a side note, they do almost all the same things as the regular charts, but not really. So that it's, there's always like some cool thing I want to do to my charts, and I can't quite do it with pivot charts, but they're so quick. So it's usually a fair trade-off. All right. And then what about the last one here? Slicers are newish to Excel. I think they got added, I want to say like 5 years ago, or maybe it was longer than that. And I was just living under a rock and hadn't heard of them before. That's possible. That sure is possible. Slicers, only for pizza. Kate hasn't used them much. Craig's seen them, done them seldom. Great. Christy says use slicers for a class. Okay, cool. Dolly, I haven't used timelines. Yeah, great example. The more you learn, the more you realize you're super beginner and you don't even know what you don't know. Yeah, I haven't used the timelines. Okay, so this is the structure or process that you have to set up to make interactive dashboards in Excel. And I'm going to give you a demo, right? So this is what it's going to look like at the end. We're going to do most of this process over the next like 20 minutes or so. It's easy, but it's hard, right? The interactive feature is you can click these called slicers, and then you see the charts. It's pretty nice. And this is easy in the sense that you just have to connect your clean data to your pivot tables and add some charts and then add some slicers. That's pretty easy, unless you've never used pivot tables or you've never used pivot charts or you've never used slicers. So we'll see how this lands in over the next 20 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to give you 2 files today. I'll demo a skill, you practice. I'll demo a skill, you practice. And the first file is going to be the like empty file that we're going to be using together. So I'm going to put that in the chat right now. Let me add that in. This is going to be the empty file. Okay. And by empty, when you get this part that says pivot tables, it's going to be empty. That sheet's empty. The sheet with the sample interactive dashboard, that's going to be empty on yours because we're building it together. Okay. That's the first one. I'm going to plop that in the chat in a moment. And then at the end, stay till the end, because I'm also going to give you this one that I've got on the screen right now, the answer key. So if you get lost or you're like, oh, I missed that one step. How did she do that? Don't worry. You're going to have the recording. You're going to have the answer key. Okay. I've got you covered. All right. Let me put the first one in the chat right now. This is the empty one. So find your Zoom chat. I bet you've been on Zoom a million times by now, but if you can't find it or something's weird, you can't download it, let us know. Maybe Kate and I can email it to you real quick. We don't want you to be lost. I don't want an hour to go by and you're like, this would have been a great session, except I never could open the dang Excel file. Just tell us and we'll get you settled. Okay. All right. And then let me know when you do have that Excel file. I'm going to open it too on mine. Kate's got it. Courtney's got it. Cool. Make sure you do a save as, save it on your computer someplace so you can find it later. I see a bunch of people who've got it. Does anybody not have it? If so, just let us know. Maybe Kate can get your email address real quick and email it to you. Okay. So I've got all the instructions written out for you. I think it's really boring to follow instructions that are like so detailed. So this is medium detailed, okay? But by the time you're like here participating and you get the recording and you have these instructions, if you want to handwrite notes, go for it. I didn't want you to feel like you have to scribble everything down and write a million miles per hour too. So you've got the basic instructions here. And then we're going to go through and build them in each of these 4 tabs. Okay, so step 1 is just really understanding the raw data. These are the questions that I typically ask myself about brand new data sets. I'll give you the gist of this data set. It's real in that I've worked on data sets like this in the past, but it's entirely made up. So don't read too much into the exact details. The gist of it is that many jobs ago, like a decade ago, I was the internal data person in a really big nonprofit in downtown DC, where I used to live. And we worked with a lot of teenagers in the community and a lot of adults in the community, and we collected demographic data on them. So that's really all you need to know, but all the details are made up. But in the raw data, you'll see things like, what have we got? About a dozen columns of data. We've got some fictional ID numbers. I'm pretending they attended programs at different sites around the city. And then we've got, I don't know, how many fictional people did I make up? A couple hundred, 150 some fictional people. Okay, that's the gist of it. It's also nice to know upfront what you're trying to learn with the data set. My graduate degree is in data analysis and statistics and research methods. So this is like something that was very ingrained in me. If you went to school for that, great. That's going to be you're going to be very fluent in knowing what you're looking for in a data set. But and we'll talk about this in the breakout rooms too, how you got into data. If you stumbled into data, or it's maybe your second or third career, then it might be a little bit harder to open up a brand new data set and know what you're even looking for. So all I do at the beginning of a new project is I go through one column at a time and I summarize it. So I say like, how many people were at site A and site B and site C? How many people mentioned these different languages as being their primary language? How many people said English? How many people said French? That's the gist of it. You're just going column by column and summarizing it. All right, so we're gonna skip that part for now because I wanna get into the fun stuff too. Step 2 is data cleaning, which I've done for you. If we had 2 hours together, we'd probably do some more of this together now, but I didn't want this to be a data cleaning session. I wanted it to be a like, how do you connect pivot tables to pivot charts to slicers session. Here's some notes on like general data cleaning topics that you'd want to do. And if you have more data cleaning questions, ask me and we can cover those in the Q&A. The gist of it is It's always a good idea to store your raw data separate from your clean data so you don't save over your raw data, because then when you make a mistake, like everybody does, everybody makes mistakes in data all the time. You have to like go back to your data and you can't go back to it if you saved over it. Yes, I've learned that the hard way many times. Sometimes I do these simple organizational things with the data. Like I might make the columns wider. I might wrap text. In this clean data sheet, I have frozen the panes. Do you see how the top row stays in view even as I scroll? If you want to know how to do that, let me know in the Q&A section. I'm happy to go over that, but I didn't want to go over too many like beginner level skills either. Sometimes I add filters like this, which let you sort and filter. Those are all optional techniques. I just like doing that to set up the data the way I need to. Typically, you'll check for duplicates, you'll check for missing data. And then in this one, I also did some simple recoding and recategorizing. One of my coworkers very early on, she did this technique where anytime she'd insert a new column, like she's recoding a variable, she always made that font color red. So it just stood out to her. And it was like a little note to her future self. So she could go back and be like, what is that column? Oh, it's red. So it's one I made. I added that to the data set. So I've done that for 15 years now consistently. And it's so helpful because I can open up the oldest files and I see all my red columns staring at me. So if you want to join the like new columns are red club, go for it. Welcome aboard. But in this one, I just wanted to show you some new columns I made. Like you might use the if statement to recode things like languages into more of a binary categorization, like Spanish versus other. If you have questions on how to do that, if you haven't used the if statement, let me know in the Q&A. I can give you a demo. I made up some fictional start and end dates. I pretended these people were coming to programs at that nonprofit I used to work at. So you might calculate things like how many days that was, or something more useful like how many months, or you might even group them with something like a nested if statement. Again, if you have questions about that, let me know. These are some fictional household incomes. You might group these as well into something like 100,000 or more, or less than 100,000, whatever your cutoffs are. Because I've done this 50 million billion times, I can usually anticipate what I want my charts to look like in the end, usually, unless like today is like a 3 cup of coffee day. So maybe not today, but usually on a good day, I can say, okay, I'm going to want a 2-slice donut chart with these 2 income level cutoffs. So I have to like now in this early step, I have to add a column that recategorizes it so it can feed into my pivot table and feed into my chart. So just know that typically you would want to do this kind of upfront in a project, but it's not always a linear, perfect process. Sometimes later you're like, oh wait, I need that variable. Let me add it. All right, that's all I want to say about data cleaning, because we could have a whole session on data cleaning. We could. Okay, are you ready to make some pivot tables? This is going to be really easy to some of you who have already used pivot tables a lot. So you can just step back and be like, yeah, I got this. I know how to do this. And it might be brand new to other people. So wherever you're at, that's great. That's cool. Okay. We need to make sure our pivot table prerequisites are met. If you don't have these prerequisites met, you'll get an error message later, or you won't be able to do the activity. So let's check these out. Okay. So the first prerequisite is every column must have a label. And that just means on your clean data set, let's say you were going to add this brand new column and you were just moving too fast, as we do, and you just didn't add a label to it. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. You're going to get an error message. So you have to have something in every column. And when I used to try to be like really fancy back in grad school, I would do these fancy little, I'd be like, this is variable 1. And I used all these shorthand things, which is so stupid because these words that you put in your column headers, they're going to be really useful to us in a moment. They're going to show up in your pivot table. So label every single column and label it something that kind of describes what's in that column too. Okay, the second prerequisite is that we have to have contiguous cells. That's a very big word with a very specific meaning. Contiguous means touching or sharing a border, like the 48 contiguous states, they're all touching and sharing a border. And in Excel, that means that your data set cannot have any totally empty rows or totally empty columns. Because our pivot table, it's going to start up here in the upper left corner, and it's going to search across, and it's going to say, where does this data set end? How far does this go? And it's going to get all the way over here, and it's going to say, oh, it stops at R because S is an empty column, which is correct. That's good. But let's say you went like this and you inserted a new column, and maybe, I don't know, maybe you shrunk it down and you forgot about it. It's going to leave out all these juicy columns with all this really great stuff in it. So make sure you don't have any completely empty columns. Same thing with rows. Your pivot table is going to start in that upper left corner. It's going to hunt down and it's going to say, I wonder where this data set is. How far does it go? It doesn't know. It doesn't know. And ideally, you'll get to the true end of the data set unless you accidentally insert a totally blank row. And then it's going to stop and it's going to say, okay, that's the end of the data set, and it's going to accidentally leave out all the rest of this data. Okay, contiguous data, touching cells. Missing data in a Swiss cheese pattern, that's okay. That's very normal. That's very typical. If you're just missing a couple things here and a couple things there, but you can't have a totally empty row or column. Okay, let's insert a pivot table. So I'll demo this, then you're going to practice. So what you're going to do is go to the sheets that says 2, clean data. You're going to click on the upper left corner, the part we just talked about, that really important corner. You're going to go to insert and you're going to click the pivot table button. We're going to put this today in an existing worksheet. Do you see this round button on my screen, existing worksheet? And you don't have to click anything else here. Okay, I'm going to go to the sheet that says 3 pivot tables, and I'm just going to click on that upper left cell. I'm going to plop it in there and click OK. And this is the foundation of our pivot table. It's empty, but this is where our data is going to get tabulated in a moment. Go ahead and do that. Add your pivot table. Let me know if you have any questions. If I have a quick answer, I can help you now, or I'll help you in 5-10 minutes when we switch to Q&A time. Magdi's done. Great. You're just clicking on the upper left corner of your clean data, insert, pivot table, existing worksheet, and you're going to plop it into that sheet that says 3 pivot tables. Great. Okay, next up, we are going to familiarize ourselves with this new pivot sheet in case this is your first time using pivot tables. So in this pivot table sheet we just made, do you see this section off to the right of my screen? It says pivot table fields. Look, what do you see up top? Do you recognize these names? ID, program site, primary language spoken. Those are the names from our clean data set. ID, program site, primary language spoken. So those are the variables that we can drag and drop and we have to play with. Very similar to Tableau. Excel pivot tables and Tableau are pretty similar. Okay, pretty similar. Not identical, but pretty close. And we can drag and drop these variables into these 4 boxes below to build our summary table that tells us like how many ID numbers do we have? How many people in each program site? So let's do let's do language first so we can build that simple chart. So you're going to drag, watch first, and then I'll give you a chance to practice it. Drag ID and put that in values. By default, it's a sum of the ID numbers. So by default, it's saying 296 plus 297 plus 298. So we need to adjust that. We need to change it from a sum to a count. Okay, so in a moment, you're going to drag ID into values. And then do you see my mouse on your screen? Make sure you don't have like your Zoom screen covering it up or anything. There's a little box that says sum of ID. There's a little arrow button. You're going to click on that arrow, go to value field settings, and choose count, so that we're just tallying up how many people, that we're not accidentally adding their ID numbers together. That's our N for our data set, count of ID 158. Okay, and then in a moment, I'm going to give you one more thing till it's officially your turn. You're going to drag primary language spoken into rows. Okay, it's your turn. ID into values, change it to a count. Primary language spoken into rows. Let me know in the chat when you're ready to move on to the next step. We almost have our dashboard. It's so close. We're like most of the way there. Isn't that crazy? Okay, I see a bunch of thumbs up from Courtney, Dolly, Steve's done, Christy's done, Courtney's done. Okay, let's. If you haven't used pivot tables before, congrats. Now you have. This is a major step. Let me show you where the name pivot comes from. It's because you can drag this variable from rows into columns, and it's going to pivot or transpose. I don't like the columns look, to be honest. I feel like it gets really long and a little bit harder to read, but for some variables, I like this better. But check this out. You get to pivot it back and forth. If you put the variable in rows, you're going to have one row per entry per thing. If you put it into columns, you're going to have one column per thing, per language in this case. And then the cool thing about pivot tables too is you could stack these. You can stack variables. Like you could take something like program site, and if you put that in columns, then you have one row per language, one column for program site. Or if you're like, I don't know, I don't think that's the look I want. Can't put my finger on it. That just doesn't seem like what I was looking for. You could swap them real quick, just pivot it, or you can stack them. I'm on a really tall laptop screen right now, so mine's really miniature in there, but I'm going to put them both into rows. So I have program site followed by language. You can swap them. You can drag them ever so carefully. Let me drag them again. Now I've got language followed by program site. Isn't that nice? Quick drag and drop with pivot tables. I think the hardest part is people just make them out to be harder than they really are. They're not that hard. They're really easy. You insert a pivot table, you drag and drop variables. And maybe the other hard part is that when your data set has things like ID numbers, you just have to change it from a sum to a count. I get a lot of frantic emails and people are like, it says I have 20 million people in my data set. I know I only have 100. That's fine. It just needs to be a count. That's it. Once you get over that, the rest flows really easily. Okay, we made a pivot table. Let's rename it real quick. I'm going to demo. You're going to do it. This is going to help us in a moment to stay organized, because I think by default it's called pivot 1 or table 1. I'm just going to rename it. So you're just going to click on your pivot table, the tabulated section, to activate it. Go up to the tab that says pivot table analyze. And do you see on the far left of my screen, I have this button that says pivot table right here. When you click that little down arrow, this is where you can name it. And I'm just going to call this language. Oh my gosh, if I can type. All right, go ahead and rename yours. Let me know when you're done. Because in real life, your dashboard might have 5 or 10 or 20 charts. So if they're just called pivot table 1, pivot table 2, pivot table 3, it's just way too much work to think about.
I didn't know you can do that, Anne. I always had pivot table 1, pivot table 2. So that's actually really cool. New thing learned today. Thank you.
Just a little thing to save future Anne and future Kate a little bit of a headache.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to assume you could all rename, or at least you know that's possible now. Let's make a chart. All right. So click on your pivot table again. Look how much we've done already. Oh gosh, I swear like the first couple of steps are the hardest. Cleaning data takes a long time. Pivot tables, if you're brand new, take some time. We're going to make a chart and add a slicer. Let's do this in like 60 seconds. It's going to be nice and easy and fast. Okay. So in a moment, you're going to click on your pivot table, go to insert. No, I'm sorry. Go to pivot table, analyze. I'm used to like regular non-pivot charts. Click on your pivot table, go to pivot table, analyze, and then click on this button that says pivot chart. And we're going to do a nice horizontal bar chart for languages. Let's keep it really simple. So you're going to select the horizontal bar option and click OK. And then one more step until I officially pass it over to being your turn. Let's cut and paste this. We're going to move it into the dashboard sheet. In real life, I don't want to have all my charts and all my pivot tables all smushed together. It gets way too busy for the end users of the dashboard. So I'm going to cut, click, and cut. I'm going to click on this sheet where our dashboard is going to be built, and I'm going to plop it in. I'm going to leave a little bit of space in the left. That's where that filter or slicer is going to go. I'm going to plop it in about right here with a good old Control V for paste. Don't do any right clicking stuff, just Control V, plop it in. Okay, make your pivot chart, plop it in. Let me know when you're finished. To recap, you click on your pivot table to activate it. Go to the tab called Pivot Table Analyze, and then add a pivot chart, not a regular chart, as I was tempted to do. Hi, Ravit. I'm glad you're here. What time is it for you?
It's 10 p.m. for me, not too late. I'm late, I know, for the session, but I know Kate brought the best person here to teach us about bars, charts, Excel. So happy to be here. Hi, everyone.
How are you all doing on your bar charts? Got it? They're super ugly with their default settings. That's okay. I just want to show you the mechanics of how we make it. Can I show you the last step? This is probably the easiest step. Okay, go to your chart. Okay, because remember we're going through these pieces, right? We've got the data, we've got the pivot tables, we've got the charts. We're going to add a slicer. Okay, so I'm going to click on the chart to activate it. Go to the Pivot Chart Analyze tab. See how when you click on your chart, Excel changes colors up here for the tabs, which is really nice. If you're clicked on some random cell in your data set, you're not going to see those important tabs at the top. So that's why I keep saying click on your chart or click on your pivot table. Okay, so you're going to click on your chart, go to Pivot Table Analyze, and you're going to insert a slicer. And I'm pretending in this fictional example that we're slicing by program site, that's what somebody might want to do. They might want to look at just site A or just B or just C. In real life, it's gonna be whatever you want to slice and dice by. So it could be any of these variables. Let's slice and dice by program site. Click OK. You get a little slicer. Isn't that nice? I'm going to put this over here on the left. I try to keep all my navigational buttons on my dashboard on the upper left because a lot of eye tracking studies show that's where people look first, at least in Western cultures, because that's how we're used to reading. Okay, so I clicked on my chart. I went to Pivot Table Analyze. I added a slicer by program site. And there's one more step, and then I'm going to let you practice. This is the very last one. We have to link these right now. Oh, are they linked because there's only one? Oh my gosh, even easier. Okay. As you add a second pivot table and a second pivot chart, or a third pivot table and a third pivot chart, you often in real life, you have to go to slicer and just connect them. I guess if you only have one, I've never only made one. In real life, my dashboards have 5, 10, 20 charts in them. This is where the name of the pivot table is going to show up. Isn't that nice? Okay, cool. Fewer steps for you. Okay, it's your turn. For the last step, click on your chart, add a slicer so you can slice and dice by program site. While you're doing that, I'm going to make a second pivot table and a second pivot chart just to show you what you'd be doing next.
And while folks are working on that, Dolly had a question on the difference between the pivot chart and a regular chart, if you can give a brief description.
The overview is that regular charts are linked to regular tables. Pivot charts are linked to pivot tables. What else would you need to know about that? You can tabulate your data in Excel in a couple different ways. A lot of people really like pivot tables because they like being able to drag and drop. It tends to be a little bit less likely to have typos in it. tends to be, but that's not the only way to analyze data in Excel. A lot of people use formulas. Like you'd say like equals count if, or equals sum ifs, equals X lookup. There's, I think, 400 and some Excel formulas that if you use Excel all day, every day, like I do, you might even really like formulas, but a lot of people don't use Excel all day, every day. It's like one of many tools that they need to know how to use. I don't want to give you the long answer. The short answer is regular tables and regular charts hang out together. They're besties, and then pivot tables and pivot charts hang out together. And if you need to do anything interactive, you're going to probably want to go the pivot table, pivot chart route, so you can add slicers like this. If you want the long answer, Kate, they all have access to the Data to Dashboard with Excel course. Mm-hmm. So there's a video in there that I made that's probably 10 or 15 minutes. That's very nuanced in all the different ways you can make dashboards in Excel. So if you want more info, that video would be a good spot.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'm going to make a second pivot chart real quick so you all can see what you would do next. Made a second pivot table. I just plopped it down here. ID into values, change it to a count. The next one might be something like, I don't know, months in program, insert. Oh, why do I always click on insert? Just habit. Years and years. And this would be like, probably like a histogram, something like this. Cut, plop. This chart by default is not going to be linked to the slicer. Look when I use the slicer. See how the first chart changes, the second one doesn't. So this is where you'd click on your slicer and go to connections, and you just connect it to another pivot table. Now they're all linked. Data feeds into tables, feeds into charts, feeds into slicers. Are there any more questions, Kate, or is it time for breakout rooms? You tell us.
Round of applause, first of all, and thank you so much for the presentation. Oh, I see Steve clapping. And everybody, you're welcome to turn your cameras on. Steve's always the best. He's always on camera. I love it. It's always hopeful, at least for me. I'm like, oh, he's nodding along. People are awake. People are following. Hey, Craig, you're here. I'm going to remove the spotlight here from Anne, so we should be able to see everybody. If you can, I think you can update your view into a gallery view so we can see everyone's camera turning on. Oh, Courtney, look at you with the shirt. Love it. The most DATAcated. Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. Hopefully you were able to go, what was it, a half a step up, and was that the goal here in Excel, or learn something new? And you do have access to Anne's full Data to Dashboard course with Excel, as well as I think what 8 or 9 other Data to Dashboard courses with other tools that you can check out in the DATAcated circle. So doing a quick time check here, we have time for any other, let me see, 1 or 2 more questions. We did have a question here about your courses. Ravit was asking if you have a course. I know outside of the Data to Dashboard course, you do have something else happening. Do you want to quickly tell the audience about that?
Yeah, I teach a lot of data viz, a lot of courses. So I have, my courses are a little bit different structure than Kate's. So Kate's are like very nice and like condensed and focused. I just love teaching. So I have lots of big courses. So I have deep dives on dashboards, of course, similar to what you saw here, but like even more techniques, presentations, reports, a lot of data viz and Excel stuff. My specialty is data viz and everyday software programs. But the one that you'd probably want to start with is the one that I made for DATAcated.
Look at Ruby, he's got his Depict Data Studio logos on there. If you see, I love it. Where did you even get this? And I don't have this. What's?
She secretly sent it to me, Kate.
I'll send you some, Kate.
I expect it now. So awesome. And thank you so much. We are going to go ahead and jump into breakout rooms. Wait, right before we do that, let me see. There was a quick question here from Dolly. Is there a way of knowing what types of fields should go in rows and what should go in columns? Good question.
Yeah, I work on a lot of multi-year projects, or I should say, I have a lot of projects over time. Like I do a lot of public health projects. So sometimes we're looking at like COVID cases per day or something. Anytime you have patterns over time, I typically put those in columns, like January, February, March. this fiscal year, this other fiscal year. I typically like to keep that in columns just so I can read across from left to right. And then whatever other variable I keep in rows. Typically, I work on a lot of research projects with like scientific studies. So I'll have things like the treatment group versus the control group in different columns. And then another good rule of thumb is I hate scrolling horizontal. I just hate scrolling this way. I don't know. I just don't like it. I don't mind scrolling down, but there's something I just don't like scrolling this way in my spreadsheet. So if you drag and drop your variables and just guess and you're like, oh, I don't know, I just don't like it. Stop, pivot it. Okay. So you're allowed to trust your gut instinct with this as well.
Thank you for that, Anne. So we're going to go into breakout rooms. Don't be shy. I love the part with the questions and answers, and I love the part where we're actually learning something, but I feel like these last 10, 15 minutes is where you actually get to meet people for real. You're going to go on camera. How are you? I see people are joining back from the breakout session. Hope you guys had a great opportunity to talk to each other. Does anybody want to share any interesting insights that you learned about each other? Anything you talked about that you want to share with the group?
Yeah, I think I would love to start and share about Vedant. He's in the 4th year at New Jersey is his internship, and he's in computer science. And I learned at least from him that you should do hackathons because they get you to another level, where he was talking about his project and how they forecasted about water harvesting in Mumbai. So I'm in Mumbai, India, and he's also from Mumbai. So we got in the same room and spoke about his journey, about my journey, and interesting insights that how he moved from computer science. Obviously, he's still in computer science. He's doing his engineering there, but Tableau got him to a place where he's now interested to learn more about data. And also he's planning to move for his MS to Canada or US. So would love to obviously see what he does next, because from computer science, is he switching to data science, or how does that work? Maybe in the next breakout session, if I get a chance, I'll ask more about it.
Awesome. Anybody else want to share what you talked about in your breakout session? Yes, Anne.
Just towards the end, Craig and I were talking about how to better assess your Excel skills. Cause I had mentioned a couple of times during the main session, like it's really hard to tell if you're a beginner or not. And not that you have to be super advanced, because I'm using the same 20 formulas now that I did 15 years ago. Like I don't need to know everything Excel needs to do. I don't need to learn coding.
Yeah.
I don't need to go learn like graphic design. Like sometimes just like keeping it focused is the best. But there are formal Excel exams. I took one a year ago that was really helpful for me because it was a really good confidence boost. And oh yeah, okay, I definitely know these things. Like I aced that part of the exam. And then there was one part of the exam where it's like, I've never even heard of this stuff. Like how have I never encountered, I never even heard of some of these terms. So you can go to like Microsoft's official site. The exams are about $100. I would recommend that, especially if your employer pays for it too. Why not have that on your resume that you passed? And then another really good Excel resource is Bill Jelen, Mr. Excel, a fellow Floridian. He lives like 30 minutes from me. I keep meaning to like go on his boat with him. He like lives near like manatees on the river. It's like a really cool area of Florida. But his YouTube channel is really nice because they're really short. They're like 3 to 5 minutes long. And he is absolutely on top of the latest features because he's a Microsoft MVP. And that's like a nice community of people who it's peer nominated. So it's like people who have done really good contributions to the Excel community worldwide. And they're on all the like advisory panels for Microsoft's like, hey, MVPs, we're considering this new feature. What do you all think? And so they're like always in tune with what's coming out.
Nice.
And Bill's YouTube videos, he'll mention, here's this brand new feature. It just came out at 8 a.m. today. And it's like 9 a.m. and he's making a video about it already. So that's a great way to just self-assess and be like, oh, I've never heard of that. I guess I'm more beginner than I realized type of thing.
And can you please put his name in the chat so people can go and find him? Yeah. And Dolly, yeah, I love Dave Langer's resources as well. I think that's great.
There's also, what's her name? Catherine? I should know this. I'm not that old. Miss Excel on TikTok.
Really?
If you want like the dancing version of Excel tutorials, Miss Excel.
Who doesn't want a dancing Excel video? Come on, that's obviously.
I think it's great. I love it.
Awesome. I know we're at time here, so I wanted to thank Anne for her time here today, and huge thank you to everybody who showed up. Can't do this without you guys, so I love that everyone's joining these monthly Circle Spotlight sessions. Our next session is with Avery Smith, and he's going to talk to us about something to do with NFT and analytics. He's keeping it vague as a surprise, but if you're interested in NFTs and or analytics, definitely join the session. He's a great speaker, very engaging, very fun and full of energy. So definitely make sure you don't miss that, and we'll get that on the calendar. So you'll see that in the upcoming event section of Circle. Always open to feedback. So if you want to send a note in the chat, send me an email, stay on here. I do have time after we wrap up the session as well.